Hello, welcome to the North Carolina Blue Wave, the podcast where we do a deep dive into the issues that matter most to North Carolinians and introduce you to candidates where we're shaping the future of North Carolina. I'm your host, Cara Pearson, and today we have a special guest, Justin Dews, the Democratic candidate for the North Carolina 8th Congressional District. In this episode, we'll be discussing Justin's vision for District 8, which includes Robeson County and other rural communities across the region. Thank you, Justin, for joining us.
Hey, pleasure. I appreciate the invitation, Kara.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to run for Congress?
Sure. Background, grew up in the Midwest, pretty humble beginnings, small town. Grandparents were dairy farmers. My dad was a self-taught welder, started his own business. My mother actually passed away when I was 5 from skin cancer, and ended up joining the Marine Corps straight out of high school in 2003. And at the time, it was the global war on terrorism, and I felt like that was my call to serve the country. And it was eye-opening in so many ways. It took me out of this bubble I was raised in, and I got to see the world from a completely different perspective and help folks. And really, I think that's what kind of led me to run for office now. This as a first time candidate, it's that a similar call to serve. And um, I think I would regret not trying to make Congress work better for the people of the country. And as the father of four, yeah, I feel like there's so many things we could be doing better, from healthcare to education to just morals and respect. I mean, it's there's a lot of things I think that inspired me to run, but I think at the very top of the board is this this ambition to get corruption out of the system. And I think if you can do that, um, you can tackle all of the things that people actually want. But you got to get the special interests out first.
Awesome. Um, how has your experience as a Marine and an entrepreneur shaped your political views?
Sure, sure. I think as a Marine first, it really, and I was raised in a very deep red household, and it kind of showed me that everyone's raised and sort of maybe in sort of some sense indoctrinated into that family's thought process. And so the Marine Corps was a chance for me to leave home, start to work with others from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, and then even deploying to other countries and realizing like, okay, these folks that we're working with, whether it's in Iraq or Haiti or the Horn of Africa, like they're just human beings who want the same things that we want, which is meals and safety and a place to rest our heads. Um, and and so it actually very much changed me from a um, to me diplomacy is the answer, not war and conflict, because of what that it's an endless cycle, right? And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and again. Oh, so I don't want to see the world continue to go to conflict after conflict. Um, that to me is not progress. That's not the world I want my children to be growing up in. And then I would say once I left the Marine Corps after about 10 years, I went to work for my father in the business he started. And I think it was 8 people. There was 8 employees when I showed up. And after about 3 years, we had grown to maybe 25. And that was, I mean, it was just a grind as a it was shifting from service to manufacturing. Um, but it taught me to see the struggles of small business and what the the complexity and the challenges of really getting something off the ground, like sustainable. Like you can start any business, but a financially sustainable one is completely different. And then from there, I went to work for a gigantic aerospace conglomerate, and I saw how they've got plenty of money, but they've got different problems, and it's the cultures, and it's the meat grinder aspects, and the fact that they'll just, as was the case during COVID, they'll lay off 10,000 employees like it's that, because there's no connective fiber there. And then when I went into the entrepreneurship side, trying to start my own wearable medical device, because again, we've seen the opioid crisis. I racked up a couple of muscular skeletal injuries during my Marine Corps service. Um, herniated discs, things like that, and the VA just kind of wanted me to have a pain pill and an opioid, and I'm like, there's got to be a different way that we can treat pain without just pharmaceuticals, and so that kind of inspired me to try to create a wearable medical device. And so I really saw the challenges of like innovative R&D, and the especially when you're not an engineer or a physician, and so I've got to see business from all these different sizes and complexities, but I just feel like greed is such an issue that we can't deal with in America, but it's the one that continues to hollow out industries. And again, for me to try to get funded for my entrepreneur or my startup, all they didn't care about who I wanted or who I could help. They cared about what sort of financial returns can you promise 5 years, 7 years, 10 years out, right? And it's just like, so if everything's driven by profit incentives, like there's plenty of people that are going to get left in the dust. And so that all of that has inspired my sort of political views and where I align on different issues. And so things like being able to call out the DoD, the fraud, waste, and abuse that I saw as a Marine, the fact that the Pentagon's not passed an audit since I think the 90s. I mean, there's some issues that I feel like most people can't or don't want to call out, and those are the ones I want to point to and shine the light on and say, hey, look, we need to address this because of X, Y, or Z reasons.
Um, I heard you name several type challenges that you had that made you think about what inspired you or your political views regarding how your political views were shaped. Tell me, within that, um, as a new congressperson, how you would tackle those challenges and help the next person come along in order to streamline or resolve what I heard you mentioning that you had concerns with yourself.
Yeah. So to me, it is sort of organizing and uniting the other voices in Congress that have constituents who are also saying the same things, like term limits need to be addressed, like shifting towards universal health care. There's actually overwhelming consensus on certain things, but you can't get Congress to pass legislation, um, because you've got so many legislators that are willing to sit on their hands. And so to address that, we need to address gerrymandering. And this is where I feel like both parties have been guilty of it. In North Carolina, it's clearly been the Republican Party gerrymandering districts, but in states like Maryland, Democrats have used it. So I think that we need to find ways to have nonpartisan primaries. We need to address gerrymandering, and we just need to get average folks to run for office who can compromise and they know what it's like to be a working for ends meet, and they can't afford to just sit on their hands, right? And that's where I feel like, again, all of this stuff is kind of ingrained, so that way we, like with term limits even in there, so we get folks to do what they say they were going to do, And then, hey, you know what? If you want to run for a different office, that's fine, but don't stay in Congress for 20, 30 years and and not move the needle much on issues.
Um, yeah. So with that said, what would be your, I guess, top three priorities for the District 8 in well, maybe make it a two-part question. What is your top priorities and what do you think the top three challenges are for the residents of your district? It could be probably the same thing, actually.
Yeah, no, this is where it gets very, very interesting because the tabletop issues, which are, economy, healthcare, and immigration, they could be dealt with so much better if you handle the structural issues of the gerrymandering term limits and getting electors to compromise. Um, and so I think for the constituents of North Carolina and the eighth district, it's clearly economies at the top of the board, and I, I I don't think that we can be blaming the government for private businesses that are jacking prices up and making record profits. And I just think we've got a very unfair tax system. We can look back and see how typically as Republicans come into office, they lower the corporate income tax rates, which is great if you own a business or you've got lots of investments. But if if you don't, then that tax burden gets shifted onto your income and your assets. Um, and so, yeah, I think that there's just so much corporate greed. I think there needs to be windfall, profit taxes on certain industries. I think it's unethical and immoral that we've got a healthcare system driven by a profit motive. Um, and so that's the top priority is addressing that sort of unfairness um, in the economic system. And then I would say after that it is reforms to, in my opinion, updating the institutions like our K through 12 system and our immigrant. My wife's a Mexican immigrant. Um, any There's no reason that we shouldn't want to add people to the tax base of America, right? And so it's just interesting how issues are being skewed these days, right? And but I'm on the side of common sense solutions, compromise, and just not being an obstruction, right? Not being an impediment to progress.
Yeah, so we've talked about rural areas, we talked about economic growth, and as a congressman, there's a whole lot of different things that you're juggling at the same time, or that issues and concerns that you're looking at. One of them also would be as an entrepreneur and um, support for small businesses. Have you thought about how you would address specific policies for them?
Absolutely. One of the things I think we need to do is have a sort of like a federal Pell Grant, but for entrepreneurs, um, and realize that there's plenty of folks who want to just jump right into building something, right? And that there's more than one pathway to success. And that's where even some of my education reform comes in and starts to teach more life skills. It teaches that there's more pathways to success, right? Some people want to, I just think we should do a better job at helping children find out what are you naturally skilled or gifted or curious about. And okay, well, how can you chase that passion into your life's career? Or just teach them that there's more than just chasing a paycheck. There's this a fulfillment aspect. Because I feel like I've seen that the more passionate you are about something, the more effort you're gonna typically put behind it. Um, So I kind of got off topic there. And so for some of them, entrepreneurship is maybe a natural pathway out of high school. Um, because again, after getting a business degree and an MBA, uh, that does not that is not entrepreneurship. That is corporate business, in my opinion. That is and again, that's where there's so many disconnects for the especially for the really deep innovative stuff. Um, that yeah, you're either forced to go try to raise a lot of dilutive funding through venture capital, or you have to compete in the academic arena for non-dilutive R&D funding from like the NIH, NSF, um, the DoD, right? They spend a ton of money in that arena as well. So, um, and again, I spending a couple years with the universities, getting to help folks or trying my best to counsel them and guide them. I mean, there's so much there's so much we could be doing better to help guide and make it easier for folks to start, right? And that was what was neat about the SBTDC was that we were a no cost resource, but again, we couldn't advertise, so nobody knew about us. It is weird, right? Like so, um, there are I believe in entrepreneurship. I feel like there's you know entrepreneurship spikes in my DNA, and so yeah, I'm whatever I could do, whether it's on the small end and helping these sort of main street businesses get started through like local small, and those maybe those Pell Grant stuff. But then for those moonshots, right? Those entrepreneurs that really want to take a shot at something wild and crazy, helping them understand how to compete in that sort of it's called SBIR and STTR. But it's basically non-dilutive government funding. It's just such a tough arena to it takes years just to kind of break into it. And
Mm.
but it's there. And so I feel like that's one of the things I could bring into this and from having helped people start businesses, having started my own, have helping run my father's, like it is not as easy as it is as what TV commercials want to make it seem when like, oh, here's where you can have a website and this, yeah, all of that stuff is sure, it's easy to start it, but financial sustainable businesses, I think that's where we could do
So,
much better at.
so what I'm hearing in that is that like with your experience background, your parents' experience and background in having successful small businesses, you will be able to you understand the resources that are needed, and maybe the programs that can be implemented in order to make anyone else that is interested in implementing a small business be successful as well.
Absolutely.
Did I hit it?
Yeah, oh yeah. And I would say that small business and entrepreneurship is more important than these big corporate behemoths. And I feel like if no matter the industry you look at, you can see they've been getting stronger and bigger in terms of their percentage of the industry. And so yeah, it's just insane to me that like a company like Amazon that we know is doing extremely well. I think they paid like a 1.2% um, corporate rate, right? Like 1% corporate rate on billions of revenue. And I'm like, as a family, I've we've got multiple, income providers here, and we're paying them much. So it's just like, man, there's an unfair system, and again, there's nowhere in the Constitution that the word capitalism is mentioned, right? And we've just got uh, I'm passionate to try to get us back on a path where we're trying to help the average American worker and not whoever can raise the most money and win a popularity contest. And so, yeah, I'm excited to run.
So now gonna kind of segue to a different type of subject. So, um, earlier in the conversation, I called your district I keep saying North Carolina, but the Highway 74 corridor, which means that it stretches down from the Charlotte Union County all the way down closer to the coast. And using the word coast means that um, the Robeson County part of your district is always impacted, I should say always impacted, but is impacted by hurricanes often due to climate change. So I just want to talk about, since you will be the next congressperson representing a portion of the county, how you would look at allocation of funding for the area, how you would advocate for us in order to ensure that we get funding,
Yeah.
especially after looking at what's happening we just had a hurricane recently in a different part of North Carolina. Um, but yes, how, in watching what was happening in the mountain area, Asheville, what your thoughts are and how you would now
Yeah.
address that as the congressperson
Oh,
for the district.
I feel like the climate change issue is this sort of canary in the coal mine where we're not aware of these long-term effects because we don't have the foresight to say, oh, we're so concerned with here and now that we were not understanding the future impacts. So I'm a huge believer in science, right? And clearly we've seen the data show us that since the Industrial Revolution, since we started to pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that global temperatures have been warming, right? And so now we're starting to see things that we don't normally see, which is hurricane seasons lasting into October, right? The oceans are warmer in the Gulf, putting more moisture in the air, which then puts the amount of rainfall way out sort of normal ranges. And so these once in 500-year storms are going to start becoming more, and that's what they've been telling us for 20 years about climate change, is that the effects are going to be slow but steady. And so um I'm I believe that we should be basically investing into mitigation um approaches now versus trying to react to the disasters later on, right? And so um the challenge, I think, is multifaceted, right? From the energy side to um again, the fact that Mother Nature is always going to have its own say. Um but yeah, I think this is where we got to come together as a country and say, how is this really going to affect all of us and our children and our grandchildren, and what is the best approach that we can take to either, well, basically to mitigate the issue, and then following the science, right? And not following necessarily special interest, or which maybe have been holding back progress and holding back changes. um so yeah, I'm the Marine Corps taught me to always leave a place better than I found it. And right now humanity is not leaving Earth in a better place than we found it, right? I mean, we're the first set of generations to live with all of this sort of, the technology, um, the material, right? Like, uh, and so I try to remind myself that this is one big experiment, but I'm also trying to be aware that if we continue to choose inaction now, that future generations are going to harshly judge us. Um, and I I guess I don't want to be complicit in that. And I would rather I would rather try to work together with a global community to tackle this, because that's in reality, one country alone is not necessarily going to do it. It's going to take, and a lot of things are going to take I think a global sort of consensus, but doesn't feel like the world's wanting to agree on much
Yeah,
right.
you're going to have to be able to collaborate with a lot of your colleagues in Congress to really to make something happen. I get it. Uh, um, yeah, and of course, there's one side that doesn't feel like climate change even exists, even though you have these record-breaking storms that continue to happen across the world. You're right, it's global. It's not just a US thing, and it does take a global society to make the difference. It's just trying to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think there's multiple approaches. I think it's energy transitions. I think it's carbon capture. I think I think it's improvements in harnessing solar and wind and geothermal. And so it's not just going to be one thing or another. It is going to be a sort of long term, hopefully thoughtful transition into, okay, how do we continue to grow the world's population, but not do so in a manner that is also harming the planet and its ecosystem. And that's a big fear, is that we'll get to a tipping point that we, in an ecosystem that we can't, necessarily easily revert, from, right. Like, um, but again, I've typically that's when humanity steps up, is when we're pushed to the edge. Um,
right.
and that's what's it's beautiful but frustrating, because right, we just saw here in North Carolina, right? Crisis brings people together. I saw it after 9/11, as well. It's just I wish it didn't take crisis to bring us together. Um, and that's where I think climate change ends. It it's not going to get to like a crisis point until it's too late. Like it already kind of is, and we've chosen inaction. So I think humanity sometimes has to learn stuff the hard way, which is which is sad for our children. And that's why I wish we had more foresight as a country, um, and thought more about what's what's 50 years out if we continue X, Y, and Z, instead of, hey, well, let's concern ourselves about job numbers and this, that, which are, again, they're important. They're maybe reflectors, but we've also got to know where our principles are, and where our compass is pointed, as um, when it comes to things like that.
Um, so you're running against a guy, your Republican challenger, who was accused of, was it voter fraud or election fraud back in 2018 or 19, who is now the nominee on the Republican side. So my question in this is, what, and I guess I should name his name. His name is Mark Harris. What would you say from your candidate or your opposition?
Can you repeat that?
I said, what sets you apart from your
Ah,
opposition or your opponent?
yeah, yeah. No, I think there's a lot that separates us. Yeah, I'm actually surprised he won his primary, and he just barely escaped that. The ballot harvesting scandal. My concern is that typically we've got a short memory, as Americans. Um, and so what sets me apart is that my top issue is running on anti-corruption and trying to get American politics to be back to boring and working. And he's got the backing of the furthest right bloc, the Freedom Caucus, the obstructionists, and it's just like and again, typically the Republicans have wanted to sow distrust into the election system, but they elected, how he won his primary still blows my mind. But um, yeah, I feel like I've been trying to serve the public my whole life, and I don't think that he's ever, I don't know if he's ever had a real job, like a real 9 to 5. Um, he doesn't have the military service. I think that gives me a different perspective on things. Um, yeah, and I just think that he's the product of a broken system, right? Where you've got partisan primaries, and you have to be the most extreme version of that party to win a super red district. And but then if we don't change that, if we don't elect more moderates and centrists and people willing to compromise, then we're going to get a Congress that is going to continue to sit on his hands and basically do nothing. And that is just, I want to go there, try to make change, and that, right, including term limits, and then leave, right? Like, I want to install safeguards to make sure that corporate greed and influence doesn't continue to put a stranglehold on democracy, which is where I think we're kind of at. Um, and so, um, yeah, I couldn't necessarily ask for someone better to go up against in terms of like how divergent in what we're willing to kind of do to be moral and ethical. So,
It's it's the dichotomy of it all. You have the law and order party, and then you have a candidate like him. But then again, you also have Trump. So law and
uh,
order.
well, and that's, again, I think this goes into something way deeper, which is people's, you know, I don't think most Republican voters know that their party was previously the Southern Democratic Party from the 1920s, and it's just, I think we haven't not done a great job at teaching civic history. I think instead of registering 18-year-olds for the draft, they should be automatically registered to vote. I think there should be a much better job at independent, nonpartisan sort of efforts to bring more voices in. Again, if you don't open the primaries, you've got this whole unaffiliated and independent voice that is not being heard or being talked to. Um, but again, I think that those are the folks that they're going to show up and have their voice heard. This election really is the Dems are going to come out hard. It's they've had the energy, and I think it's the independents and unaffiliated that have really shifted blue. I
Mm.
guess what I'm hearing as I'm talking to folks, because they don't want to see the chaos. I think they want to see authenticity. They want to see things get done, and so I feel like I can represent that, the ability to compromise and actually work hard and get things done. Whereas I think he represents the Matt Gaetz and the MTGs and the Lauren Boeberts, the Freedom Caucus members, um, who are willing to just sit on their hands just to get some spotlight, uh, and media attention, and that's just it makes me cringe. So, but again, I'm optimistic. I mean, we've got lots of issues to address, but I'm an eternal optimist and know and still feel that our brightest days are ahead. It's just it's gonna take it's gonna take effort, right? But I feel like the energy and the intensity is out there, right? I just seen the lines with the early voting between yesterday and today. I'm I'm optimistic.
You mentioned something earlier when we were talking about Mark Harris. Well, actually before him too, about being your platform be tackling corruption in so since the Mark Harris subject is really related to corruption, could you tell us how what your platform is in regards to that, how you plan to do or advocate regarding lessening corruption in
Yeah,
general?
absolutely. It is really a multi-pronged approach. I wish I had my stuff up in front of me as I typically do. Um, it is it's addressing gerrymandering, term limits. It is getting um, the dark money and overturning Citizens United, which has allowed a flood of corporate money into the system. It is getting removing lobbying from existence. It is open. It is opening primaries to be nonpartisan, and all of those measures, when combined, independent redistricting or nonpartisan redistricting, which addresses the gerrymandering. You've got term limits, which address these career politicians. You overturn Citizens United. You get the dark money out, and that will just, I hopefully, in general, remove corruption. You take corporate lobbying out of the mix, which drowns out the voice of the average American voter. You make these changes to automatic voter registration. You teach more civic literacy, and those measures, combined, make it almost, I don't want to say impossible to be corrupt, because it seems like those in power seem not always corrupted, but put as many safeguards and rails in as we can to safeguard democracy. And again, I think that's where there's been some inaction in Congress and the Supreme Court on issues like gerrymandering, where the Supreme Court will say, no, send it back to the states. Well, the states are the ones guilty of doing it. And the founding fathers created Congress first, and then the presidency, and then the Supreme Court. And so I feel like there's this misunderstanding of who's supposed to do what in some sense. But yeah, it's just like things like those term limits, where we put a term limit on the presidency. So why haven't we done that on the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court? It just, and again, there's overwhelming consensus from the American people on these things. They want to see that, but the only people that can institute that is themselves. And so it's like this inability to put yourself in check. And that's what I want to be able to call out and say, this is BS, because I think most of the American public is in that boat where there's like, okay, this isn't what it's supposed to be. They can deal with some, election season sort of point, but this seems like a whole new level of toxic and sowing distrust in government institutions. Like, and I feel like people just like police and firefighters, the people who pave our roads, teachers, I mean, the first responders, those are public servants too, right? The militaries, I mean, they're the government, right? And so it's like, I just don't like the fact that the other side wants to demonize the institutions that they want to run and protect. It's so, yeah, and then all of that has gone into why, again, I felt like it was in a sense, a call to serve.
What has been the most challenging aspect of your campaign that you feel?
Uh, it is, I would think, in my opinion, having to work a day job, or up until about June, I was working two full-time jobs. And so that gives you no time to go out and meet people and campaign. And I've intentionally chosen not to raise a lot of money. I've mostly spent most of my own funds, a couple grand, to get signs and literature and build my own website and stuff like that. And it's showing me that and this is what's frustrating, is that it feels like you do need a lot of money and you need a big team to sort of just kind of get that sort of name recognition and awareness. But I would love nothing more to then to flip that on its head and prove that wrong if I can get elected and having raised basically $3,000, um, to say, you know what, you don't have to go out and raise, you know, half a million or $1 million for a congressional, and but it is that I think to do it in the best manner, it would you got to be a full-time candidate, and 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 that seems like they said 80% of the time you got to ask for money, and that just I refuse to do that. That makes me cringe, especially at an economic time like this. Like I get you need supporters, but I think you can have supporters by votes, not necessarily always running the most ads. And I don't know, but this is as a first time candidate, I could be very naive against all that, against or in these sort of opinions. But it's
How can voters that are watching uh, help you in your efforts
sure.
or how to engage your campaign?
Yeah, I would just say, again, we've got a website up and a Facebook page. I think just the best way is to just to talk to folks who maybe are non-traditional voters or maybe don't have their minds made up. I think a lot of folks do, but I also think that there's, like as my wife said, like we should all be doing better not to be voting blindly and doing the research and the homework. And I feel like if we could get maybe more traditional, maybe Republican voters to look at their options in this race, right? That's how they could help. Like just spreading the word. Again, I'm not looking to get a bunch of contributions because it's really, election voting's already started, right? So it's just the, you know, telling their buddy or their friend that maybe has not already voted, like, hey, this seems like a legit guy, a decent human being that's got uh, some morals and ethics that we can vote for, right? Because I don't want to see, the masses continue to get like disenfranchised and 35% voter turnout at primaries and 60 to 70% at general elections. Like I think we could be doing better. I think it's I think election day should be like a national holiday. I mean, I think we really need to be lifting up the civic responsibility of voting. And real, yeah, big time.
What is the most important message you want to leave with voters in general? Robeson County and up and down your district, we're all different, so you got a eclectic mix.
Yeah, no, and that's what I actually love about it is that they're everything from the biggest, you've got Southeast Mecklenburg to Anson, which small, big, and in between, right? Like, um, I think it's just don't like stay like participate. Like, I know that it seems crazy, and in some ways it is, but we can right wrongs and we can make things better than they are now. And it just takes electing, I think, the folks that are willing to compromise and not virtue signal or demonize the other side. Because if you do that, then how are you going to work together if you're taught to hate, the other side? So, um, yeah, and that's where I probably could have gone very, negative or something on Mark Harris. Um, but again, he's got his own, baggage to deal with, right? And all I can do, like, I don't want to say vote for me because this guy's scary. I would rather just say, look at us too as human beings and where we've been, what our past has been, and judge us on that, right? And I think the choice is pretty clear when it comes to that.
You mentioned your website earlier, but I don't think you gave out the address. So
Sorry.
if no worries. If you would circle back and give us your website or any social media that you would like to share.
Sure. Yeah, the website is justicewithdues.org, and the Facebook page is Dues for Congress. Um, and that's really I'm not been a big social media guy, which I'm realizing I probably kind of have to shift that because I do, lots of folks get their information that way, and I'm just not a huge like, oh, I want to take, do selfies and things like that, right? So, uh,
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
no, no, for sure, for sure.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode of the North Carolina Blue Wave. Big thank you to Justin Dews for joining us and sharing his vision for the future of Congressional District 8. And as always, thanks for joining us. Keep the conversation going. And don't forget to make your voice heard at the ballot box. Vote Justin Dews. Until next time, I'm your host, Cara Pearson, Chair of the Robeson County Democratic Party. And thank you.